Hello, hello. This is Lucas Mason, recording for the first time on this new channel here. I hope all you comrades are doing very well in these times. So, as I'm recording, for the first time after the debate with Haas, there have been a lot of political events that have taken place recently. Of course, we all know about the recent scandal, which has been very difficult and made for very trying times within our mega communist movement. So, for any who are not directly from, the existing mega communist movement, wondering what I'm all about, well, you see, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, right? I'm a Marxist-Leninist without a doubt, unequivocally. But also, I would say an American patriot, and someone who is very much interested in making a country great again, which is, of course, the namesake of the mega movement. Like many in this political camp, of course, I understand that what we have to do as communists is get in touch with the real movement of the working people. I believe that hopefully, with solidarity and cooperation, we can form a united front against the political establishment of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, which for so long has betrayed the fundamental values of our country, values of the Founding Fathers, etc. And of course, establish a government by the people, of the people, and for the people, once again in our country, and in an entirely new form, in an entirely higher stage of society. So, what is this first video going to be about? Well, it's going to be a small commentary, right, on one of the most important issues of the working class today, which is, of course, the problem of the deindustrialization of America, right? That will be the main topic that I will discuss, first of all. A very rudimentary, introductory, first topic to discuss on this channel. A very important issue, and one that's really connected fundamentally to every socialist movement that has ever been instantiated in the past, right? So without further ado, let's begin with the video for today. So what are the biggest matters in the minds of working people today in America? Undoubtedly is the problem of the deindustrialization of America. It was this issue that formed the platform for the MAGA movement originally, when Donald Trump was first elected. And it was the principle upon which the platform was founded. The real working class roots of the movement, to a large extent, and not, of course, the Republican establishment that asserted its interests while Trump was in power, but the real working class movement within MAGA, of course, was very much concerned with American deindustrialization. The problem of deindustrialization has a bearing on the present severity of the unemployment situation, the unproductive and degrading forms of work to which many are subjected in our society, the poor real income among the common man today, and of course, all of this despite the robust financial position. The financial position of the country in terms of its current account balance and nominal GDP, and etc. All these metrics that to a large extent are rather superfluous in terms of how they're measured, due to inflation and due to various kinds of financial manipulation. The industrial jobs once provided in America and Canada entailed a much greater degree of job security, income, productivity, and provided for greater national sovereignty than is available to the workers of our time. To a great extent, our present crisis of sovereignty, employment, and income is a direct result of the flight of our nation's industry abroad. Our country is now a base of global imperialism, and its GNP is provided for mostly by a system of international financial exploitation. For the typical person, life is not so rosy as the bourgeois economists and their statistics would have us believe. And the main cause of this situation is the lack of any substantive, productive base in our country. Real production has been reduced greatly from what it formerly was, ensuring an absolute dependence on imports, gained through the international purchasing power of the dollar, which is propped up in turn by super profits extracted by the globalist or world imperialist system. So evidently, reindustrialization is rightly on the minds of the entire mass of the working people, from farmers to factorymen, dock workers to truckers. The important question, though, which underlies the popular consciousness of the matter, is how exactly the prospect of reindustrialization could be realized, if it's even a goal that can be accomplished, and by what means. The growth of the mega-communist movement looks to be a monumental beginning of the formation of a broad Bolshevik front in our country, that is a people's front, something that is not bound up with hegemonic financial interests, but is truly an authentic expression of the common sentiment of our people, a majority movement, a majority faction, against the financial oligarchy which has taken control in our country. It's within this movement, of course, that Marxism-Leninism is beginning to take on a definite national form. However, there's a number of issues so far that are arising in the movement that ought to be criticized first, before we can continue and talk about the prospect of industrialization. Of course, so far, the common narrative being spun by various theorists and agitators who have joined into this critical information war appeals to the prevalence of small business as a basis for the redevelopment of the national economy. And in fact, medium business too, really the middle capitalist class in general. They believe that the activity of our country, economically, will advance and the basis of socialism be created based upon the activities of the middle capitalist class and based upon the activities of petty bourgeois forces. However, this view is fundamentally mistaken and actually a right-wing deviation from the real historical phenomenon present set by every single instantiation of socialist society in the past, including in the USSR, in the People's Republic of China, in Germany, Poland, the whole bloc, the whole socialist camp that existed, right? Industrialized in quite a different way than how these right opportunists, I would even say, have suggested. The error of this view, of course, is that it underestimates the power of capitalism in America to a vast degree. In essence, the line pushed by certain libertarians under the banner of mega-communism consists in the mistaken view that the liberation of petty bourgeois elemental forces will create a cauldron of liberation and productivity that will create the conditions for the exercise of popular sovereignty over the national economy. The adherents of this line may simply be mistaken with good intentions. Indeed, a wide variety of outlooks exist among the popular mass of the working people, and certain individual opinions inevitably give expression to the raw vulgarity, ideologically, among the working class, which is precisely how they give expression to their opposition and the skepticism that they have toward the mandates of the ruling establishment. This is to be expected within the movement, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's really an expression of the wisdom of the people, and a petty bourgeois interest within the movement may simply be a result of some kind of latent values in our society that have yet to be fully elaborated through dialectic and through some kind of popular movement to give a proper expression to a real central line that captures the essence of the working class's consciousness in our time. And of course, by the very nature of the mega-communist movement, it should be expected that the entire working people of all opinions should be brought together to form a political line that's genuine. Indeed, some comrades may also be mistaken members of the petty bourgeoisie, who by the fact of their roots in the American class can be corrected dialectically, as they have an interest, of course, in performing their own labor, not in exploiting others. However, due to the necessity of waging a constant struggle against the American left, we communists must inevitably guard against the opposite tendency, lest our movement be debased and undermined by right opportunist elements, who present revisionism and the denial and downplaying of the essence of Marxism-Leninism as a viable way with which to easily draw a distinction against our leftist enemies, overwhelmingly situated in the labor aristocracy. The struggle against leftism, of course, must be absolute. However, as of yet, there seems to have been no criticism, as far as I know, against the rightists who may attempt to subvert our movement and neuter its potency. They could easily do this by advocating for the preservation of institutional property rights and financial liberalism that this inevitably engenders, and that gives rise to, and provides the basis for the capitalist system of exploitation. While they set themselves up in opposition to the American left, composed as they are by degenerate Trotskyite, social democratic, and anarchist tendencies, which have always been against the interests of our nation, they nevertheless use this as a form of political credit and an opportunity to support the ruling establishment within our movement, and likely as a way to rise up in the capitalist system by means of another, second bourgeois revolution. To begin to illustrate the errors of the rightist outlook, which denies the fundamental differences between capitalism and socialism and their inherent opposition, I shall first give a brief account of some of their positions. Firstly, on the matter of land reform. The historical experience of the great revolutions of the past has shown that land reform is the most fundamental and critical task of any communist party. The real roots of the entire economic system lies in its provision of the most fundamental goods to the population, produced to a large extent in the agricultural sector and in rural areas. The development of socialist industry is absolutely impossible without first changing the entire basis of agriculture and putting it on the most advanced technical basis and on a sovereign basis. The right opportunists believe in essentially a distributist model, whereby the overwhelming basis for agriculture should grow to private farming and small-scale agricultural production, with the entire sector run on an entirely liberal basis, allowing for maximum freedom to small private farmers. This view is fundamentally mistaken for a number of reasons. Firstly, I shall quote Comrade Lenin. As long as we live in a small peasant country, there is a surer basis for capitalism in Russia than for communism. This must be borne in mind. Anyone who has carefully observed the life in the countryside, as compared with the life of the towns, knows that we have not yet torn out the roots of capitalism and not yet undermined its very foundation, the basis of the internal enemy. The position of Comrade Lenin is very clear. Small-scale production, both in town and country, provides a sure basis for capitalism and for socialism or for communism. This is because the free reign of the small commodity producer in the town or countryside, without dictatorship of the proletariat exercised absolutely, inevitably unleashes petty bourgeois elemental forces and engages in rural capitalism, corrupting the working class, as with the unproductive kulaks who exploited the working peasantry. Out of the conditions of modernity and a transition to socialism, respectively, where finance capital will still exist and commodity production is not carefully regulated, the power of capital and the ability for the small bourgeoisie to gain a surplus will inevitably result in the continuation of capitalist exploitation and the eventual restoration of capitalism and the dismantling of any proletarian dictatorship over politics that may be gained through some kind of popular revolution in any form. If we follow the advice of the right opportunists who set themselves up as mega-communists and don't thoroughly criticize their errors as we do with the leftists, then there's a clear possibility, on the basis of dialectics, that in this process of our struggle with the institutional discursive power of the leftists, that the revolution and the popular movement so far taking shape will be nullified, and at best serve to restore an earlier form of capitalism in our country, whose inevitable path of historical development will lead someday to the redevelopment of imperialist hegemonic power. No, comrades, if we want real change, then we must support the exercise of workers' dictatorship not just within a political party, but in every factory, farm, village, town, and city. Petty bourgeois individualism in our movements, classical liberalism, Hayekianism, marketeering, and any kind of ideological wavering should be struggled against in all of its forms. The clear boundary of demarcation has been drawn against the leftists, and now it is time to draw a clear line of demarcation against the political and economic establishment from the other side. Just as the democratic establishment works to subvert the workers' movement by all means, their mere image on the so-called right-wing party works to subvert us as well, with lies about the omnipotence of the market, the free market for that matter, and the supposedly fallacious nature of central planning and of rational management by workers' government over economic forces. The main error that pervades the right opportunist account of the path our country should take for reindustrialization fundamentally lies in the false equation of the liberation of petty bourgeois elemental forces and the liberation of the middle capitalist from the imperialist with the liberation of the forces of production as a whole. In fact, all that their path would entail would be the constant, ceaseless reproduction of the exploitative and parasitic tendencies that exist already in the town and country, and without restriction. The workers would have more proximate perhaps, but no less cruel masters. We would still have wage labor on a large scale, and we would still have wage slavery, although perhaps a workers' government could provide some means of welfare and curb the worst excesses of such a system. Even so, will a workers' party, paying heed to such a line, may be able to dismantle the globalist imperialist financial hegemony. The revolution that would take place in industry and agriculture would inevitably and undoubtedly be a petty bourgeois and middle capitalist revolution against the imperialists, rather than having fundamentally proletarian character. This would lead to the subjection of the vanguard of the working people, the vanguard of the proletariat, and the exo-peasantry of our time to the old law of the anarchy of production. It would mean a return to the cauldron of despair of the Industrial Revolution, as it existed in England. Proletarian dictatorship, through the party, may be able to curb these tendencies through regulation and tax, but to stop at this point would be gravely erroneous. The right opportunists are able to sell this view by rightly setting themselves up in opposition to big agriculture and big pharma and big finance, but they deny the contradiction between capitalist forces and socialist forces, equating socialism to a frankly corporatist conception of regulated capitalism. To support this argument, they point to the People's Republic of China, or Lenin's new economic policy, forgetting that the latter was not even acknowledged to be a socialist system by Lenin himself, and merely as a means by which to provide the possibility of establishing socialism. In opposition to what is essentially reducible to red libertarianism, and the sentiment that they have, and the sentiment of the capitalist rulers of our time, there stands the real historical experience of socialist industrialization in China and in the Soviet Union. The latter one being a European experience, and one that was greatly based upon the American experience of industrialization, will be my focus for now on account of its relative proximity and my conceptual understanding of it. The historical process of establishing socialism and industrialization in the USSR can be broken down into a number of periods with distinct characteristics. War communism, the new economic policy of 1922, the Stalinist industrialization of the 30s, and the maturity of the system after the Second World War. Together, these various periods provided a concrete model of development that can be principally reproduced here in the West, when the inevitable victory of the working people takes place in the realm of politics. In the same way the USSR was made great under Stalin, we too can make America great in the same way, especially because to a large extent his policies were based upon the policies that made America great and made America industrialized in the first place. In fact, many Soviet industrial enterprises, cities, like Magnitogorsk, for example, were based upon the great industrial cities of the United States. Commenting on the process of socialist nationalization that characterized the early years of Soviet power up to the 5-year plan, the 1954 textbook on political economy from the USSR Academy of Sciences states, socialist nationalization, in the first place, does away with the capitalist ownership of the chief means of production, and thereby abolishes the economic domination of the bourgeoisie. In the second place, it provides the proletarian dictatorship with an economic base, by transferring the commanding heights of the national economy, that is, the key branches of the economy, to the working people. In fact, as important as the socialized ownership is of the means of production, is also the socialized control of production, through the proletarian state, and according to workers' dictatorship. It is precisely the concentration of the industry into the hands of the state, as state socialist property, that allows for the rational control of man to be exercised over the affairs of the national economy, and for the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and of blind economic forces over man and politics, and the working people to be replaced gradually by a socialist system free of exploitation, where popular sovereignty reigns, and where conscious will uses the economic laws of society to transform that society. By making large-scale industry the basis of the national economy, petty bourgeois elemental forces can be eliminated, and the forces of production liberated on a local level to engage in the productive work on their own terms and for true self-interest and for self-actualization in the most productive way and without taxes and with the distribution fully according to the quantity and quality of one's labor. Furthermore, under the system of dictatorship of the proletariat and a complete system of socialist property, the scourges of capitalist society are turned into engines generating wealth and progress for the masses of the people. Concentration of production, with socialized planning and management taking the place of market forces, blind economic forces, and exploitative profit, turns horrific monopoly prices, resulting from the stranglehold of the big capitalist and financier, into a mechanism for the realization of the greatest industrial production on the basis of the most advanced techniques. Not only that, but concentration of production can reach an even higher degree of advancement, and production can become even more sophisticated through combination of production and concentration, resulting in a higher quality and more diverse products. The state control of foreign trade is also critical for any prospect of reindustrialization. While market forces may crowd out any attempts to establish productive domestic industry with cheap foreign goods, socialist control of trade ensures, to a great level of detail, the ability to restrict the import of any materials which can be produced domestically, providing a basis for the increase of profitability and capital accumulation for our domestic firms. Combined with the state concentration and control over major industries, the real economic base of society and the necessary productive forces can be developed rapidly and on a scale impossible under a capitalist system, where private interests of monopolists or competing capitalists reign and where the sovereign control of the working people cannot exist due to the sacred principle of private property inherent to the capitalist mode of production. All of this means an immense increase of wealth, production, and sovereignty for our people, and all without the exploitation and inherent contradictions of capitalism. There's simply no use to resort to degenerate Hayekian arguments about the omnipotence of the market and free trade, and to resort to Adam Smith's conception, which simply serves to augment and support the bourgeois dictatorship and justify private property, and not only that, to justify the exploitative financial hegemony of the British Empire, the financial empire still existing in our time, which has been undermining our American society. The omnipotence of the market has already been undermined by the innumerable capitalist crises as well, so-called market failure. So the jury is really back in, and it doesn't speak favorably of a free market system. The economic achievements of the backward agrarian country that became the Soviet Union could be accomplished in our great nation to an even more profound effect, and in fact drawing from our nation's history, especially when you consider the policy of the past, the American system, and FDR's New Deal, both of which entailed a fundamentally revised way that the state related to the economy. This can be accomplished in our country with less bureaucratic troubles than the Soviet Union, and with the latest information technology. This is the model of true and socialist industrialization, where the means of man's existence accords perfectly with his natural social essence. It is precisely this model that affords us this prospect of making America great again, greater than any civilization which has ever preceded it. I hope that this first cursory discussion of the American reindustrialization prospect has been somewhat informative, and it is no doubt a topic that ought to be elaborated further in the future. For the time being, this has been Lucas Mason, and I'm signing off now.